The ceiling fans in the Lagos High Court had stopped working 3 rainy seasons ago. Nobody bothered to fix them anymore. The air hung thick and oppressive, carrying the scent of old documents, desperation, and the sweat of people who knew the scales of justice in this courtroom were permanently tilted. Chief Magistrate Babatunde Okonkwo didn't just preside over his courtroom. He ruled it like a feudal lord. At 58 years old, with a protruding belly that strained against his judicial robes and a face that glistened with perpetual perspiration, he sat elevated on his bench like a king surveying his subjects. His voice boomed through the cramped space, not with the authority of law, but with the arrogance of unchecked power. "Next case," he bellowed, slamming his gavel with unnecessary force. In the back row, partially hidden behind a wooden pillar, sat a woman who looked entirely unremarkable. Her name was Amara Kruma, though the court docket listed her simply as A. Kruma, land dispute defendant. She was 65 years old, her hair wrapped in a faded purple gelly that had seen better days. She wore a simple Ankara wrapper and a white blouse that was clean but frayed at the collar. On her feet were worn leather sandals, the kind sold in the open markets for next to nothing. To anyone who glanced her way, she appeared to be exactly what Chief Magistrate Okonkwo expected to see. Another poor woman caught in the grinding wheels of a system designed to crush people like her. But Amara Kruma's eyes told a different story. They were sharp, observant, missing nothing. They had read thousands of legal briefs, presided over landmark constitutional cases, and stared down ministers and presidents. Because Amara Kruma was not just any woman facing a land dispute. She was Justice Amara Kruma, the first female Chief Justice of a Supreme Court in Nigeria, one of the most powerful judicial voices in all of West Africa. And today, she was hunting. 3 weeks earlier, Amara had received a phone call that shattered her evening peace. Her grandniece, Chidinma, was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Auntie Amara," Chidinma had choked out, "they took our land. Mama's land. The land Papa left us." Chief Magistrate Okonkwo ruled against us without even looking at our documents. He said women like us don't deserve to own property. He said we should go back to our husbands' families. Amara had felt the old fire kindle in her chest. "Chidinma, tell me everything." Slowly, the story that emerged was sickeningly familiar. Chief Magistrate Okonkwo had been running a sophisticated land-grabbing operation for years. He would rule against vulnerable defendants, widows, orphans, anyone without political connections, and transfer their property to a network of wealthy businessmen who paid him handsomely. The victims had no recourse. Appeals were expensive, and Okonkwo had connections throughout the lower courts. He called Mama an illiterate village woman, Chidinma had whispered. He laughed at her, Andy, right there in open court. Everyone laughed with him. Amara had made her decision in that moment. She couldn't simply issue an order from her Supreme Court chambers in Abuja. That would alert Okonkwo, and he would cover his tracks. No, this required something more surgical, more personal. She needed to see his corruption with her own eyes. She needed him to reveal himself completely, to hang himself with his own words. So Justice Amara Kruma, Chief Justice of Nigeria, took a leave of absence. She told her clerks she was visiting family in Lagos. She didn't tell them she was going fishing for a very dangerous shark. The Courtroom Theater. The case before hers was a young man named Emeka, barely 25, accused of stealing a bicycle. The evidence was circumstantial at best. A single witness who wasn't even sure of the date. Chief Magistrate Okonkwo barely glanced at the file. "Guilty," he pronounced, his jowls shaking. 6 months in Kirikiri prison. Next, Emeka's mother screamed. The young man stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. The court bailiff, a massive man named Sergeant Musa, grabbed Emeka by the arm with unnecessary roughness. "But your worship," Emeka stammered, "I was at work that day. My supervisor can testify. Did I ask you to speak?" Okonkwo roared. "Sergeant Musa, remove this criminal from my sight. His kind always have excuses." Amara's jaw tightened. She made a mental note. This boy's case would be reviewed within the week. Case number 4521. The court clerk droned. A thin woman named Mrs. Adeyemi who looked as tired as the building itself. Land dispute. Dr. Ibrahim Fashola versus A. Kruma. Plaintiff alleges illegal occupation of property on Admiralty Way, Lekki Phase 1. Amara stood slowly, her joints protesting slightly. She had chosen her costume carefully. The old wrapper, the faded gelly, the worn sandals. She had left behind her wedding ring, her watch, anything that might signal wealth or education. She carried only a tattered plastic bag containing photocopied documents. She shuffled to the defendant's table, moving like a woman defeated by life. Chief Magistrate Okonkwo finally looked up from his phone, where he had been watching a football match. His eyes raked over her dismissively. "State your name for the record," he said, already sounding bored. "Amara Kruma, Your Worship." Her voice was soft, deliberately hesitant, with just a trace of her grandmother's village accent that she had long since polished away during her years at Oxford and Harvard. "Speak up," Okonkwo barked. "This is a court of law, not a prayer meeting." Several lawyers in the gallery snickered. They were the regulars, the ones who paid Okonkwo a monthly consultation fee to ensure their cases received favorable treatment. "I am Amara Kruma, Your Worship," she repeated, louder this time. Okonkwo leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Mrs. Kruma, you are accused of illegally occupying a prime piece of property in Lekki. Dr. Fashola has presented his deed, properly registered with the Lands Bureau. What do you have to say for yourself?" "Your Worship, if I may present my documents." "Documents?" Okonkwo laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "Let me guess. You have some papers from your village chief? Some agreement written on the back of a cigarette packet? Madam, this is Lagos, not some bush village. We follow the law here." The gallery erupted in laughter. Mrs. Adeyemi, the clerk, smirked. Even Sergeant Musa, standing by the door, allowed himself a grin. Amara stood very still. She felt the familiar cold clarity descend upon her, the same clarity she felt when delivering a particularly devastating legal judgment. But she kept her face humble, her shoulders slightly hunched. "Your Worship, I have a deed as well. From 1987. It predates Dr. Fashola's document by 15 years. She reached into her plastic bag and pulled out a carefully aged document. It was genuine. The land in question had indeed belonged to her late brother before being stolen through fraudulent means. Okonkwo didn't even reach for it. 1987, he scoffed. "Madam, do you think I'm a fool? These old documents mean nothing. The Lands Bureau has been reformed, digitized. Dr. Fashola's deed is in the system. Yours is not. That tells me everything I need to know. But Your Worship, if you would just examine." "I don't need to examine anything." Okonkwo's face was turning purple now, the veins in his neck bulging. "I can see what you are. You are one of these women who think they can squat on valuable property and claim ownership through some ancestral nonsense. Well, not in my court." He pointed his gavel at her like a weapon. "Let me educate you, Mrs. Kruma. In Nigeria, women do not inherit land. That is our tradition. Your husband is dead, I presume? Then the land goes to his male relatives. That is the law." Amara felt a pulse of rage so pure it almost made her dizzy. "Your Worship, with respect, that is not the law. The Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria guarantees." The gavel came down like thunder. "Silence!" Okonkwo roared. He stood up now, his robes billowing around him. "How dare you quote the Constitution to me? Do you know who I am? I am the law in this courtroom. What I say is the Constitution." He turned to address the gallery, playing to his audience. "Can you believe this woman? She comes into my court dressed like a market woman, probably can't even write her own name, and she wants to lecture me about the Constitution?" The lawyers laughed obediently. One of them, a sleazy-looking man in an expensive suit, actually applauded. Amara's voice, when she spoke, was still quiet, but there was steel beneath the softness. "Your Worship, I can assure you, I can write my name quite well." "Oh, really?" Okonkwo sneered. "What level of education do you have, Mrs. Kruma? Primary school? Adult literacy class? I have a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Lagos, Amara said calmly, a Master of Laws from Oxford University, and a Doctor of Juridical Science from Harvard Law School. The courtroom went silent. Okonkwo stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Then he laughed, but this time it sounded forced. Harvard? Oxford? Madam, if you're going to lie, at least make it believable. Now I know you're wasting my time. He picked up his phone, already dismissing her. A fine for the plaintiff, Dr. Fashola. Mrs. Kruma, you have 30 days to vacate the property. Failure to comply will result in police eviction and contempt charges. I'm also fining you 50,000 naira for wasting this court's valuable time. Next case. Amara didn't move. Your worship, I would like to enter an objection to your ruling. Okonkwo's head snapped up. What did you say? I'm formally objecting to your ruling. You have not reviewed the evidence. You have not allowed me proper representation. You have violated my constitutional right to due process as guaranteed under Section 36 of the Sergeant Musa, Okonkwo bellowed. Remove this woman. She is in contempt of court. The massive bailiff moved toward Amara, his hand reaching for her arm. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sergeant, Amara said quietly. There was something in her voice that made Musa pause. He glanced at Okonkwo uncertainly. Your worship, Amara continued, her voice beginning to change, the village accent disappearing, replaced by the crisp, authoritative tone that had silenced Senate chambers and made cabinet ministers sweat. You have made several critical errors today. First, you have violated my right to present evidence. Second, you have imposed a ruling based not on law, but on personal prejudice. Third, and most critically, you have impersonated a judicial officer. Okonkwo's face went from purple to white. Impersonated? What are you talking about? I am a magistrate. Oh, you are a magistrate, Amara agreed. She reached into her plastic bag again, but this time she didn't pull out old documents. She pulled out a folded sheet of official letterhead bearing the seal of the Nigerian Judicial Council. But as of 6 a.m. this morning, your judicial commission has been suspended pending investigation into corruption charges. The courtroom erupted. People began whispering urgently. Mrs. Adeyemi dropped her files, papers scattering across the floor. The lawyers in the front row looked at each other with growing panic. This is ridiculous, Okonkwo shouted, but his voice had lost its confidence. Who do you think you are to come in here with forged documents? Sergeant Musa, arrest this woman for impersonating. For impersonating whom, exactly? Amara's voice cut through his bluster like a knife through butter. You haven't even asked to see my identification, Magistrate Okonkwo. You were so convinced by my wrapper and my sandals that you never thought to look deeper. That is your fundamental failure, not just as a judge, but as a human being. She walked closer to the bench now, her movements transforming. The shuffle was gone. Each step was measured, powerful, the walk of someone accustomed to authority. For months, I have received complaints about this courtroom. Complaints about a magistrate who sold justice to the highest bidder. A magistrate who believed his position made him immune to accountability. A magistrate who looked at poor women and saw only opportunities for humiliation and theft. These are lies. Okonkwo was standing now, gripping the edge of his bench. Slander. I'll have you charged with defamation. Will you? Amara's eyebrow arched. And which court will hear that case, I wonder? Because as of this moment, every single judgment you've issued in the past 5 years is under review. Every single one. Okonkwo grabbed the paper from her hand, his hands shaking. His eyes scanned the document, growing wider with each line. It was signed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It was signed by the woman standing before him. This can't be, he stammered. Amara straightened to her full height. The humble shuffle was gone. Her voice filled the courtroom with natural authority. Chief Magistrate Babatunde Okonkwo, my name is Justice Amara Kruma. I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Nigeria. For the past 6 months, my office has been investigating allegations of judicial corruption, bribery, and systematic violations of citizens' constitutional rights in this court. Today, you have confirmed every single allegation. She reached into her wrapper and pulled out a small digital recorder. The red light was blinking. I have recorded this entire proceeding. I have documented your refusal to review evidence, your sexist and discriminatory remarks, your violation of due process, and your explicit statement that you, quote, are the law, and that the Constitution is what you say it is. Okonkwo collapsed back into his chair. His phone clattered to the floor. The lawyers in the gallery were frozen. One of them tried to slip toward the door, but found two stern-looking men in dark suits blocking his exit. They had been sitting quietly in the back row throughout the hearing. Those gentlemen, Amara said, nodding toward them, are from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. They have warrants for your arrest, Chief Magistrate Okonkwo. Also for you, Barrister Okafor. She pointed to the lawyer in the expensive suit. And you, Barrister Chun, and you, Mr. Adelik. We know about the bribes. We have the bank transfers. We have the WhatsApp messages. We have everything. Mrs. Adeyemi, the clerk, made a small whimpering sound. Mrs. Adeyemi, Amara said, her voice softening slightly, if you cooperate fully with the investigation, you may avoid criminal charges. But your complicit silence has allowed this corruption to flourish. That, too, has consequences. One of the EFCC agents stepped forward. Chief Magistrate Okonkwo, you are under arrest for corruption, bribery, abuse of office, and violations of the Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses Act of 2000. Okonkwo seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. His shoulders slumped. The arrogance that had sustained him for so long evaporated like water on hot asphalt. He looked at Amara with something between hatred and fear. You trapped me. I gave you every opportunity to act with integrity. Amara replied, her voice steady and calm. Every single opportunity. I walked into this courtroom willing to be proven wrong. I hoped, genuinely hoped, that the complaints were exaggerated, that you were simply strict, not corrupt. But you couldn't help yourself, could you? She took a step closer. When you saw me in this wrapper, when you saw my worn sandals, something activated in you. Not justice, not fairness, contempt. You saw someone you thought was beneath you, and you couldn't resist the urge to crush them. That's not law, Magistrate Okonkwo. That's tyranny. Please, Okonkwo's voice cracked. Please, your lordship, I have a family. My daughter is in university. My son. So did the people whose lives you destroyed, Amara said, and now there was steel in her voice, cold and unforgiving. So did Chidinma, my grandniece, whose mother you humiliated in this very courtroom. So did Emeka, who is sitting in a cell right now for a crime he didn't commit. So did Mrs. Aladil, the widow you evicted from her home so your friend could build a shopping plaza. So did Mr. Adebayo, who lost his business because you ruled against him without reading a single page of evidence. She paused, letting her words sink in. Your family will survive, Magistrate Okonkwo. They will be embarrassed. They will struggle. But they will survive. That's more than you've gave to the families you destroyed. Justice, however, must be served. The EFCC agent pulled out handcuffs. The sound of the metal clicking shut around Okonkwo's wrists echoed through the stunned courtroom like a funeral bell. She turned to address the shocked courtroom. Let this be a lesson to every judicial officer in this country. The law is not yours to bend. Justice is not yours to sell. And the people you look down upon, the widows, the poor, the uneducated, they are not yours to crush beneath your ego. She looked directly at Emeka's mother, still sobbing in the corner. Madam, your son's case will be reviewed immediately. I suspect he will be released by this evening. Then Amara removed her faded geli. Beneath it, her hair was elegantly styled. She reached into her wrapper one final time and pulled out her Supreme Court identification badge, letting it hang around her neck. The transformation was complete. The humble village woman was gone. In her place stood one of the most powerful jurists in West Africa. Take him away, she told the EFCC agents. As they handcuffed Chief Magistrate Okonkwo, he began to cry. Please, your lordship, I have a family. My children. So did the people whose lives you destroyed, Amara said coldly. So did Chidinma, my grandniece, whose mother you humiliated. So did Emeka, who is sitting in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. Your family will survive. Justice, however, must be served. Within hours, the news had spread across Lagos like wildfire. Social media exploded with videos, commentary, and outrage. The hashtag Justice Nkrumah began trending not just in Nigeria, but across the entire African continent. The video of Okonkwo's arrest, filmed by several observers on their phones, went viral. By evening, it had been shared millions of times across Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, and beyond. The headline was everywhere. Supreme Court Chief Justice goes undercover to expose corrupt judge. Television stations interrupted their regular programming. Radio talk shows were flooded with calls. People who had suffered in Okonkwo's courtroom began coming forward, their stories creating a devastating portrait of systematic abuse. But Amara wasn't finished. The arrest of one corrupt magistrate was just the beginning. In the days that followed, the full scope of Okonkwo's corruption network emerged like a rotting corpse rising from deep water. The investigation revealed a syndicate that would have impressed organized crime bosses. It involved not just lawyers and magistrates, but also officials in the Lands Bureau, police commissioners, land surveyors, court clerks, and even 2 state legislators. The EFCC set up a special task force headquarters in a commandeered office building in Victoria Island. Amara visited personally, reviewing evidence late into the night. She read through hundreds of case files, each one a story of justice denied, of lives ruined by greed. Your Lordship, one of the lead investigators, a sharp woman named Agent Okonkwo, no relation to the disgraced magistrate, presented a thick folder. We've traced the money. The network was sophisticated. They used shell companies, offshore accounts, even cryptocurrency in some cases. Amara flipped through the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? Over 2 billion naira stolen from citizens over the past decade. The land in question, your family's property, was just one piece in a massive land-grabbing operation. The land in question, the property that had sparked Amara's investigation, was just one small piece of a vast, poisonous puzzle. Over the past decade, Okonkwo and his associates had perfected their scheme. They would identify valuable properties in developing areas of Lagos. Then, using their positions, they would manufacture legal problems for the owners. A sudden zoning violation, an unexpected tax assessment, a mysterious claim from a long-lost relative. When the overwhelmed property owners came to court, Okonkwo would rule against them. The properties would be sold at government auction, always to the same group of buyers who paid pennies on the dollar. Those buyers were fronts for a consortium that included Okonkwo himself, 3 other magistrates, a senior police officer, and a state housing minister. We have bank statements showing Okonkwo received over 180 million naira in unexplained deposits, Agent Okonkwo continued. His official salary is 3.2 million per year. He owns 4 properties in Lekki, 2 in Abuja, and 1 in London. His children attend private schools in Switzerland. His wife drives a Range Rover that costs more than he officially earns in 5 years. Amara closed the folder carefully. Arrest them all. Every single person connected to this network. I want them in custody by tomorrow morning. Your Lordship, some of these people are well connected. The housing minister is the governor's cousin. We might face political resistance. Amara's smile was cold. Agent Okonkwo, I once stared down a military dictator when I was a junior judge, and he wanted me to rule in favor of his brother's company. I told him that even generals must bow to the Constitution. Do you think I'm afraid of a corrupt housing minister? The agent grinned. No, Your Lordship, I don't think you're afraid of anyone. Within 48 hours, 17 people were arrested. The operation was coordinated and swift. Police vans descended on luxury estates at dawn. Lawyers found themselves in handcuffs in their own offices. A magistrate was arrested while playing golf at the Ikoyi Club. The media covered every arrest. Nigerians watched with a mixture of shock and satisfaction as people who had seemed untouchable were led away in chains. Amara personally oversaw the formation of a special tribunal to review every case Okonkwo had presided over in the past 10 years. It was an enormous undertaking, over 4,000 cases affecting tens of thousands of lives. The tribunal worked out of a converted warehouse, with 20 judges brought in from other states to ensure impartiality. Amara visited every week, reviewing the most egregious cases personally. Emeka, the young man accused of stealing a bicycle, was released within 24 hours. When Amara met him, he wept. "Your lordship, I thought my life was over. I thought no one would believe me." Amara put her hand on his shoulder. "Justice delayed is still justice. Emeka, you have a bright future ahead of you. The Ministry of Justice will issue you a formal apology, and I am personally ensuring you receive a full scholarship to complete your university education. What do you want to study?" "Engineering, your lordship. I want to build things. I want to make Nigeria better." "Then that's exactly what you'll do." The stories of restoration began to multiply. Mrs. Aladil, the widow who had lost her home, was found living in a single room with her 5 children. The property that had been stolen from her was returned, along with compensation for the 3 years she had spent in poverty. Mr. Adebayo, a small business owner who had lost everything after an unjust ruling, received his seized assets back and was given a low-interest government loan to restart his business. A young woman named Folake, who had been imprisoned for 6 months on false fraud charges, was released and offered a position in the reformed court system as a victim's advocate. Each restoration was documented, publicized, celebrated. Amara wanted every Nigerian to see that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about making victims whole again. Chidinma's mother had her land rights restored in a special ceremony. More than that, Amara established a legal aid clinic on that very property, a modern building with air conditioning that actually worked, offering free representation to women and marginalized people facing property disputes. At the opening ceremony, hundreds of people gathered. Amara cut the ribbon herself, still wearing the same faded purple gheli she had worn to court that day. "This building stands on land that was nearly stolen," she told the crowd. "It stands as a reminder that no injustice is too small for us to care about. That every citizen, regardless of their wealth or education or connections, deserves to have the law protect them." The crowd erupted in applause that lasted for minutes. 6 months later, the trial. The trial of Babatunde Okonkwo and his co-conspirators was held in the Federal High Court, Lagos Division. It lasted 3 months and became the most-watched legal proceeding in Nigerian history. The prosecution presented a devastating case. They had the recordings from Amara's undercover operation. They had financial records showing millions in bribes. They had testimony from dozens of victims. They had WhatsApp messages where Okonkwo and his associates joked about harvesting properties from peasants. Okonkwo's defense attorney, one of the few lawyers in Lagos willing to take the case, argued that his client was merely enforcing the law as he understood it. The argument fell flat. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was packed. News cameras were positioned outside. Amara sat in the gallery, not as Chief Justice, but as a private citizen who had been wronged. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Obi, looked down at Okonkwo. He was a shadow of his former self, thin, graying rapidly, wearing a cheap suit instead of his judicial robes. "Babatunde Okonkwo," Justice Obi said, her voice filling the silent courtroom, "you were entrusted with one of the most sacred duties in our democracy, the administration of justice. You took that trust and you perverted it. You turned your courtroom into a marketplace where justice was sold to the highest bidder." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You mocked the poor. You humiliated the vulnerable. You stole from widows and orphans. And when confronted with your crimes, you showed no remorse, only anger at being caught." Okonkwo's head was bowed. He said nothing. "This court sentences you to 15 years imprisonment on the corruption charges. 10 years on the bribery charges to run concurrently. Your judicial pension is forfeit. Your properties, obtained through illegal means, are seized. And you are hereby disbarred from ever practicing law or holding public office in the Federal Republic of Nigeria for the remainder of your natural life. The gavel came down. Outside, crowds erupted in celebration. For many Nigerians, it was the first time they had seen a powerful person truly held accountable. The Kirikiri maximum security prison was a harsh place, designed to break spirits. Former Chief Magistrate Babatunde Okonkwo, now inmate 4782, shuffled through the prison yard in his faded yellow uniform, no longer wearing judicial robes. His co-conspirators had all turned on each other, desperate to reduce their sentences. The housing minister received 12 years. The corrupt lawyers received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. Mrs. Adeyemi, the clerk, received a suspended sentence in exchange for her testimony, but lost her position and pension. Okonkwo had received 15 years. His appeals have been denied at every level, culminating in a final rejection from the Supreme Court. The rejection letter had been signed by Justice Amara Nkrumah. In prison, Okonkwo worked in the library. It was a bitter irony. Surrounded by law books he had once wielded as weapons, now reduced to merely shelving them. Sometimes, late at night, he would pull out a constitutional law textbook and read the sections on judicial ethics and due process. The words that had meant nothing to him before now burned like acid on his conscience. Meanwhile, in Abuja, in the Supreme Court chambers, Justice Nkrumah sat at her desk reviewing a new case. On her wall hung a framed photograph of her grandmother, a woman who had never learned to read, but who had taught Amara the most important lesson of her life. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice served with wisdom changes nations. There was a knock on her door. "Come in," Amara called. A young woman entered, wearing a modest business suit, her hair neatly braided. It was Chidinma, now enrolled in law school at the University of Lagos. Behind her came Emeka, wearing university colors and carrying engineering textbooks, and Folake, the former prisoner who now worked as a victim's advocate. "Auntie Amara," Chidinma said, her eyes bright, "I got my first semester results. I passed everything. Top of my class." Amara stood and embraced her grandniece. The stern Chief Justice melted into a proud aunt. "I never doubted you for a moment." "Me too, Your Lordship," Emeka said shyly. "I made Dean's List. First person in my family to attend university." "And I," Folake added with a smile, "just won my first case. A widow facing eviction. We got her property rights restored." Amara felt her eyes misting with tears. She waved them all to sit. "Tell me everything. Every detail." For an hour, they sat in the chambers of the Supreme Court, these young people whose lives have been destroyed by corruption but restored by justice, sharing their victories and dreams. They talked and laughed, and Amara felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: hope. "I want to be like you," Chidinma said finally. "I want to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." Amara smiled, but her expression grew serious. "Then you're already on the right path. But remember, justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about ensuring that every person, no matter how poor, how uneducated, how powerless they seem, knows that the law protects them equally." She walked to the window, looking out over the city. Abuja's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Chief Magistrate Okonkwo thought power came from the bench, from the robes, from the ability to intimidate. He was wrong. True power comes from integrity, from courage, from the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when, especially when, it's difficult. She turned back to them. "Each of you represents something he could never understand. You represent the resilience of the human spirit. You represent the idea that justice, though sometimes slow, is inevitable. And you represent the next generation of Nigerians who will refuse to accept corruption as normal." Chidinma nodded solemnly. "The newspapers are calling what you did the long arm of justice." Amara chuckled, a warm sound that filled the office. "I prefer to think of it as the patient hand of karma. Sometimes the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they grind exceeding fine." Emeka leaned forward. "Your Lordship, do you ever regret it? Going undercover like that? It was dangerous. Okonkwo could have had you hurt." Amara considered the question carefully. "Emeka, When I walked into that courtroom in my old wrapper and worn sandals, I knew exactly what I was doing. Yes, there was risk, but you know what the greater risk would have been? Doing nothing. Knowing corruption existed and hiding behind my office, issuing orders from Abuja that would be ignored in Lagos. She sat on the edge of her desk, her posture relaxing. Sometimes justice requires us to step down from our pedestals, to walk among the people we serve, to understand their struggles not as abstract concepts in legal briefs, but as lived realities. Folake spoke quietly. You gave us our lives back, your lordship. No, Amara shook her head firmly. I simply removed the obstacles that never should have been there in the first place. You gave yourself your lives back. You survived. You persevered. You refused to let injustice define you. I just made sure the people responsible face consequences. There was a comfortable silence. Then Chidinma pulled out her phone. Auntie, you need to see this. She showed Amara a news article. The headline read, Okonkwo case sparks continental reform. 7 African nations adopt new judicial oversight measures. Amara read silently, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, a real smile, reaching her eyes. Now that, she said, is justice multiplying. The legacy. The Okonkwo case became a landmark in Nigerian judicial history, studied in law schools across the continent. It sparked nationwide reforms in the lower courts that went far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Within 6 months of the arrests, video recording in courtrooms became mandatory across Nigeria. Judicial officers were required to undergo annual ethics reviews, conducted by independent panels that included citizens who had experienced the justice system firsthand. A whistleblower protection system was established for citizens to report corruption without fear. The system was named Operation Transparent Justice, and it received thousands of tips in its first year alone, leading to the removal of 34 additional corrupt judicial officers across 12 states. But perhaps most importantly, it sent a message that resonated throughout West Africa and beyond. No one is above the law. Not magistrates, not judges, not ministers, not the powerful or connected. Ghana adopted similar reforms within months. Kenya launched its own undercover investigation program. South Africa invited Justice Nkrumah to speak before their parliament about judicial accountability. Tanzania revised its entire court oversight system. The African Union invited Amara to lead a continental task force on judicial reform. She accepted, but with one condition: that half the task force members be ordinary citizens who had experienced injustice firsthand. And sometimes, justice was a faded geli in worn sandals, waiting patiently for the corrupt to reveal themselves. Because Amara Nkrumah had learned long ago that you don't fight tyranny by matching its volume. You fight it with patience, with preparation, and with the unwavering conviction that the truth, given time and opportunity, will always rise to the surface. Chief Magistrate Okonkwo had laughed at a woman in a wrapper. He thought she was powerless because she dressed simply, because she spoke softly, because she fit his prejudiced image of someone without education or influence. He forgot that power isn't in appearances. It's in integrity. It's in the quiet strength of knowing who you are and what you stand for, regardless of what others see when they look at you. And on that humid Lagos morning, integrity won. 5 years later, the Amara Nkrumah Legal Empowerment Center had grown from a single office on reclaimed land to a network of 15 clinics across Nigeria, with 3 more opening in Ghana and 2 in Kenya. They provided free legal services to over 10,000 people each year, with a success rate of over 80% in civil cases. Chidinma Nkrumah, now a practicing attorney with 4 years of experience, ran the Lagos branch. She had won landmark cases on women's property rights, children's welfare, and police brutality. At 32, she was already being mentioned as a future judicial candidate. On the wall of her office hung a photograph taken on a particularly memorable day, a slightly blurred image of her great-aunt in a faded purple geli and old wrapper, standing before a corrupt magistrate's bench, her eyes revealing the steel beneath the humble exterior. Beneath, it was a brass plaque with a quote from Justice Amara Kruma. Never mistake humility for weakness or silence for ignorance. The most powerful voice in the room is often the one that waits for exactly the right moment to speak. Emeka had graduated with honors in engineering. He now worked for a construction company that was rebuilding the 4th Street neighborhood, ensuring that the homes were built with integrity, both structural and moral. He had married Folake, and they had a daughter they named Amara. On this particular morning, Chidinma was preparing for a case when her assistant buzzed. "Ma, there's someone here to see you. She says she's a friend of Justice Kruma." Chidinma looked up, curious. "Send her in." A woman entered, elderly, elegantly dressed, carrying herself with quiet dignity. It took Chidinma a moment to recognize her. It was Mrs. Adeyemi, the former court clerk from Okonkwo's courtroom. "Mrs. Adeyemi," Chidinma said, standing. "Please sit." The older woman sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap. She looked much older than Chidinma remembered, the weight of guilt having aged her faster than years alone could account for. "I don't expect forgiveness," Mrs. Adeyemi began, her voice shaking slightly. "I enabled terrible things. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. I laughed when I should have objected. I was a coward." Chidinma listened quietly, as her great-aunt had taught her to do. "But I wanted you to know," Mrs. Adeyemi continued, "that Justice Kruma changed my life. When she could have destroyed me completely, she gave me a chance. The suspended sentence, the opportunity to testify, it saved me. More than that, it woke me up." She pulled out a folder from her bag. "I've spent the last 5 years working with a citizens' rights organization, documenting court corruption across Lagos. I've gathered evidence on 3 magistrates who are operating just like Okonkwo did. I wanted to bring this to you, to your clinic, so you can do what Justice Kruma did, expose them before they destroy more lives." Chidinma took the folder, flipping through pages of meticulously documented cases, financial records, witness statements. It was professional, thorough, devastating. "Mrs. Adeyemi," Chidinma said slowly, "this is extraordinary work. Have you considered joining our team? We need investigators, people who understand how the system works from the inside." The older woman's eyes filled with tears. You would trust me? After everything?" "Justice Kruma taught me that redemption is real," Chidinma said. "That people can change. That justice isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation. If you're willing to fight on the right side now, we need you." Mrs. Adeyemi nodded, unable to speak, tears rolling down her weathered cheeks. Later that evening, Chidinma called her great-aunt. "Auntie Amara, you won't believe who came to the clinic today." As she recounted the story, she heard her aunt's warm laughter on the other end of the line. "You see, Chidinma," Amara said, "this is why we do this work. Not just to punish the corrupt, but to redeem those who are willing to change." Mrs. Adeyemi spent 5 years in her own kind of prison, the prison of guilt and regret. Now she's free, and she's fighting for others. That's justice completing its circle. "I'm going to take the case," Chidinma said. "The 3 magistrates she documented. We're going to expose them." "Good," Amara said. "But remember the most important lesson." "Which one?" "You've taught me so many. Never let them see you coming," Amara chuckled. "Sometimes the most powerful weapon in our arsenal is being underestimated. Let them think you're just another young lawyer. Let them think women can't be fierce. Let them make all their assumptions, and then show them exactly how wrong they are." Chidinma smiled, looking at the photograph on her wall. In it, her great-aunt looked like any ordinary elderly woman. But in her eyes, if you looked closely enough, you could see the fierce intelligence, the patient strategy, the absolute certainty that justice would prevail. "I learned from the best, Auntie." "No, amara kerekti dientli. You learned from your own strength. I just showed you it was there." After they hung up, Chidinma sat in her office as darkness fell over Lagos. She thought about all the lives changed by one woman's courage to stand in a courtroom, dressed in old clothes, letting a corrupt magistrate mock her, all while recording his every crime. She thought about Emeka, free and building homes instead of rotting in prison. About Folake, advocating for victims instead of being one. About Mrs. Adeyemi, redeemed, and fighting for justice. About the hundreds of families who had their homes restored, their names cleared, their dignity returned. And she thought about the powerful lesson at the heart of it all, that true justice doesn't announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it shuffles in wearing worn sandals, carries a plastic bag, and waits with infinite patience for the right moment to strike. Chief Magistrate Babatunde Okonkwo had looked at an elderly woman in a faded wrapper and seen nothing worth respecting. He had judged her by her appearance, dismissed her by her accent, and condemned her with his arrogance. He never imagined that the humble woman before him held the power to dismantle his entire empire of corruption. He never considered that wisdom might wear worn sandals, or that authority might hide behind a faded galley. And that, Chidinma reflected, was why he lost everything while Amara Nkrumah changed a nation. Justice, after all, is sweetest when it's patient. And karma, when served with wisdom, changes everything.